Do you power multiple aquariums from one single air pump? And have you ever considered the impact that back pressure is having on your air pump? Well, I certainly hadn't, and so I was quite surprised when after just 6 months my new Hailea diaphragm pump had gone kaput. Now, I was aware that diaphragms would wear out over time, but there was no way that I expected there'd be an issue this quickly. I was powering all of my tanks from one steel splitter attached directly to the short rubber hose connector that came with my pump, and I just assumed that given how powerfully it seemed to be running all of my filters, that it must be releasing virtually all of its pressure through the air lines. But evidently this was not the case. Just check out the wear on these rubber diaphragms. There is no way they should have worn out that quickly. And whilst I'll be fixing this air pump to have as a backup, I decided that now might be the time to step things up and get a much more reliable linear piston pump. I'll do a full side-by-side comparison video about these two pumps in a few weeks' time, but for the purposes of this video, all you need to know is that my new MEDO LA-45C air pump was a lot more reliable and a lot more powerful. But given all that extra power, hadn't I just massively increased the risk of back pressure, creating excessive wear and tear? Yes, I had. But I had a solution. And part of this project is about me future-proofing my fish room. We won't be in this little Victorian basement forever, and one day I will be able to easily expand my new system to power upwards of 40 tanks from this very same pump. And the system I'm referring to is an air ring, a sealed ring of plumber's pipe which you can easily tap into with airline hose valves to bring a supply of air to your aquariums to power filters or oxygenate the tank. And these types of setup are usually a ring because this regulates the operating pressure throughout the loop system. Often you will see them installed all around the ceiling edge of a fish room, although in my case, I'm going to install the ring behind my aquarium rack so that all my tanks will only ever be around 30 centimeters away from a powerful mainline air supply. Installing the air supply above tanks is also helpful in avoiding the need for extra check valves. But air rings on their own do not mitigate the possibility of back pressure. It will certainly be less than when I was immediately blocking airflow with that steel splitter, but until I am powering more than my 8 tanks, we're still operating at much higher pressure than we need to be. And so the solution is to install a pressure gauge and a bleed valve into the air ring, which will enable me to control the operating pressure and, most importantly, alleviate any problematic back pressure. As I expand the system, I can continually adjust the working pressure, and there may come a time when I have so many tanks that I can switch off the bleed valve completely. Quite frankly, after researching air rings in quite some detail, I'm perplexed as to why more people aren't installing a bleed valve. But anyway, here is how I went about it. So firstly, the materials I used are all 22mm push-fit fittings and pipe. This was mainly for ease of build, but also because, like I said, one day I'd like to upgrade the air ring, and this will give me the flexibility to do this easily, as opposed to if I'd sealed everything more permanently with a jointing compound. In addition to the obvious elbow joints, I have 2 T-joints, one for the intake pipe from the air pump, and the other for the outflow pipe towards the bleed valve. And for the bleed valve element, I purchased a stop valve and a 3/4 inch tap connector. This enabled me to then attach a brass pneumatic colon silencer to the end, which will act kind of like an air stone, breaking up the airflow and dampening the sound of its release. This final part was a key to the bleed valve and not straightforward to figure out. In the US, it seems that there is a company called Gemco that sells a threaded silencer which does seem to literally be a huge ceramic air stone. However, here in the UK, the best I could come up with was the brass cone silencer. Nevertheless, it does the job and is easily available on eBay and Amazon. I'll leave a list with links to all the parts in the video description. So the build itself was pretty straightforward. Measure a bunch of pipe, cut everything to size to incorporate the T-joints, and push fit it all together. Initially I had an elbow in the outflow bleed valve, but you'll see later that I changed this slightly for ease of use once I'd established where everything would be on the wall and how best to access a stop valve behind my tanks. For installing the airline valves, a top tip came my way via Taylor at Simply Better. You simply drill the appropriate size hole and then attach the valve to your drill as if it were a bit and gently screw it in. The plastic is supple enough that the valves will thread themselves, and in no time at all you can tap as many valves as you need into the air ring. Now, I would highly recommend testing this technique on an offcut of pipe first, especially in order to establish the right drill bit size. And given there is a lot of variability around the world, I will leave you to work that one out rather than giving you the wrong piece of advice. You know the old adage, measure twice, cut once. So after the bleed valve was complete, it was time to install the pressure gauge. This required a fair bit of research to establish what measurement range was going to be the most useful, and I suppose this might differ depending on your precise setup and air pump power. But in my case, I've used a 0 to 2 bar pressure gauge with a 1/8 inch thread. Again, this self-threaded quite nicely, but I also sealed with some silicone and secured with some duct tape to ensure that it didn't unscrew, since it didn't feel as secure as the airline valves. So the final piece of the puzzle was attaching the air pump. You need to find a suitable size rubber tubing in order to avoid any irritating vibrations reverberating around the ring. In my case, I bought rubber radiator hose from a local auto parts shop and used boiling water to soften the hose and attach it to some plastic pipe, which then attaches in at the second T-joint. After that, it was just a case of installing the air ring on the wall behind my tanks and adding short lengths of airline hose to power each of my filters. Compared to the tangled mess of airline hose that I used to have, this is a marked improvement, and I have so much more control over the power of each filter. In terms of noise, the cone silencer does a great job. If you really listen for it, there is a slight hiss, but it is very dull, and the air pump is noticeably quieter too, presumably because there is no more back pressure to contend with. So let's highlight how the whole system works. Air leaves my new linear piston air pump via the rubber radiator pipe. It passes through a straight piece of 22mm plastic pipe which attaches into the air ring. Air then circulates within the ring, which via its loop design creates a consistent working pressure throughout. This pressure is measured via the gauge at the top of the ring, and the pressure can be regulated via opening or closing the bleed valve to extinguish excess air via the brass cone silencer. Finally, air leaves the air ring via one of the many airline valves in order to power the filtration in my tank. And am I happy with how this project worked out? Absolutely. Am I slightly annoyed that I knackered a pump before discovering the solution? Kinda. But then again, it's been a fun project to show you guys, and my fish room is now completely future-proofed. So I hope you enjoyed the video and found it useful, and I'll see you next time. Cheers.